Doug Grunther, your host, looking forward to 2 hours of conversational improvisation with our two co-hosts, a special guest involving a sea lion, and some surprises. Sharkey was a popular sea lion who shared a stage with Ella Fitzgerald, Bob Hope, many a vaudeville stage, and starred on Broadway. He was trained in Kingston, New York, many decades ago. We'll talk to the great-grandson of the trainer, who's written a very interesting book called Sharkey, When Sea Lions Were Stars of Show Business. And from that we go to Sharkey. Is Gary on the phone?
I am. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, my pleasure, and nice to meet the nephew of one of our favorite people, Rick Reagan. And your great-grandfather was quite an interesting gentleman. You mentioned in your book that growing up, you knew about him. Tell us about how you sort of became conscious of your great-grandfather and his amazing career with a sea lion.
Growing up, I vaguely knew about him. Really, the topic of his sea lion training didn't come up all that much. And so I knew that, for example, my middle name, Mark, was named after him, Mark Hewling. But that was about the extent of it. It took until a podcast came out in 2015, and it was a podcast about Sharkey. And I listened to that podcast, and my jaw dropped. And within a month, I went on a research frenzy, and within a month, I decided I was going to write a book because what I was uncovering was just blowing my mind.
The book is Sharkey, When Sea Lions Were Stars of Show Business, 1907 to 1958. And your great-grandfather was a Kingston resident back, what we're talking about, the turn of the century? Of the 20th century?
Right. He grew up outside of Buffalo, but after he got involved in sea lion training, he moved to Kingston, him and his two brothers, and that was back in 1914 when they set up shop in Kingston. And he lived there for the rest of his life.
And how did he get involved with a sea lion?
It was through a friend of a friend. It was very happenstance. In fact, he wanted to be an electrician. Electricity was just coming into the fore, and he wanted to be an electrician. Him and his two brothers stopped by a friend of a friend who happened to be a world-renowned SEAL trainer, sea lion being synonymous. And the rest is history. They took the sea lion training extremely fast, and within a couple of years, they were working for the Ringling Brothers Circus, which was the biggest show around. And from there, they branched out into vaudeville and radio and ultimately television.
Let's talk a little bit about vaudeville. What a great era. What did you learn about vaudeville by researching your great-grandfather's participation with Sharkey in it?
I learned that vaudeville, the essence of vaudeville, was that it was live, in-person entertainment, which back in the day, people were clamoring for. You had the post-Civil War, you had an emerging middle class, and all of a sudden, people were clamoring for entertainment, and vaudeville really provided, to a large degree, provided that need. And vaudeville was huge back in the day.
And, of course, created stars that became then radio stars, which became then television stars that we know. What was the essence of Sharkey's act? I mean, we saw seals can balance balls on their nose, et cetera, but what were some of the more amazing tricks or capabilities that Sharkey had?
What set Sharkey apart from all the other sea lions was his personality, and he was a comedian. He truly was a natural-born comedian, and my great-grandfather, Mark Hewling, just encouraged his development, especially in the area of comedy. So while we think of trained seals as balancing beach balls and doing tricks, and Sharkey certainly did some of that, but at his best, he was a comedian who could be on the stage doing sketch comedy routines without his trainer in attendance, and he, time and time again, brought down the house with his comedy. He also knew he was a comedian, and audiences loved it.
How do we know he knew?
Because when, for example, great question, by the way, if the applause wasn't to his liking, he would slap his side, kind of a "I can't hear you," and to rouse the audience into more. And when he did something particularly well, he gave himself a round of applause. The other thing he did was when he was working with other sea lions, if one of the other sea lions muffed a trick, Sharkey would cover his eyes in embarrassment just to get laughs. So he had my great-grandfather trained upwards of 200 sea lions, and Sharkey was by far his standout.
The photo on the cover of the book, which is Sharkey When Sea Lions Were Stars of Show Business, 1907 and 1958, is an attractive, buxom woman holding a deck of cards, and Sharkey's holding a card in his mouth. Do you know the story behind the photo?
I don't know who she is. What I can tell you is Sharkey did a lot of publicity shots, often with stars, Broadway stars, and the like. That was one of his publicity shots that he did, and I don't know the background, but it's really a classic. It's a great photo.
Victoria.
Well, I was very interested when Doug told me about this because my first thought was, well, how smart can a seal be? And my second thought was, well, maybe they're mammals, in which case they have big brains. And then I looked it up, and they are mammals. I had a really hard time on the net finding out how their intelligence is ranked. People wanted to tell me everything about the various species and the fact that they're not in the North Atlantic, et cetera. But do you know anything particular about the intelligence of sea lions?
Well, I can tell you what my great-grandfather thought. As far as he was concerned, they were just as intelligent as, for example, dogs, which are often considered an intelligent mammal. And as far as Mark Hewling was concerned, there was no mammal that was more intelligent than a sea lion. Of course, his opinion was somewhat biased, but he considered them to be extremely smart. And in fact, went as far as to say there was nothing that they couldn't do, within their natural capabilities.
We're talking with Gary Bohan Jr., who we know is a fine trumpeter, but has written a book called Sharkey When Sea Lions Were Stars of Show Business, because his great-grandfather famously trained a seal who was incredibly intelligent and had an amazing decades-long career. We talked about vaudeville. Let's go into radio. Radio was the big medium, the new big medium of the 30s. Who were some of the people or some of the shows that Sharkey performed with and on?
There was a radio show before it became a popular TV show called Truth or Consequences.
I remember the TV show, yeah.
Right. I mean, growing up in the 70s, we all remember that. But it was a radio show before it became a TV show. And Sharkey performed on that. He would perform as he toured throughout the country. He would often perform on the radio. And for those wondering what he might be performing, he played an instrument. You had mentioned horns before, a set of tin horns, but Sharkey had his trainer built a homemade instrument, and Sharkey was able to master tunes on that and play them on that instrument. One in particular was an Irish folk song called Where the River Shannon Flows, and that became his big feature. So Sharkey was able to navigate his way around this instrument in a way that was really unsurpassed to this day.
See, that's amazing.
Was it a keyboard?
Excuse me?
It was probably horns, right?
It was not horns. It was bells. On the one side, it was bells, and on the other side, it was buttons. So it was really set up in a way that it wasn't quite like a piano, but there was an arrangement of buttons. I believe it was 5 on top, 4 below that, and Sharkey would navigate his nose really at blinding speed and play music.
Do we have any recordings?
I do. I shared that recording with Gus the other day, and I'd be happy to send it to you. In fact, I've got a recording of Sharkey performing that on the Ed Sullivan Show.
All right, wait a minute. I keep lauding the World Wide Web. Are you at a computer?
I am at a computer.
Could you email it?
I've been looking for it. I can't find it. But
Well, did he hasn't sent it to you?
right, yeah, you can email it.
Can you email it to Ron? Can you give your email out on the air, or should you do it privately? You could send it to mine, Doug at WoodstockRoundtable.com. And I'll forward it to Ron, who will play it on the air.
Okay.
And we'll see if the studio doesn't catch fire.
I was looking on YouTube, and I can't find
It's not on YouTube? Sharky's not on YouTube?
Well, sure. No, it's funny. When I did my
Couldn't find it.
research, there wasn't a big splash about Sharkey. Interestingly enough, now come to find out, he was constantly reviewed in magazines like Billboard and Variety.
Well, email the, and if we'll try to get it on today. If not, we'll do it next week. But I'd like to send it to Doug at WoodstockRoundtable.com, because that's where listeners can get a hold of me. And send it right over. I'll forward it to Ron, and we'll see if we can't get it on.
Okay, you got it.
Okay?
Did he have good timing?
He did. He first had to memorize the sequence of notes. It was 32 notes, and so that in and of itself was quite a feat.
Uh-huh.
And then my great-grandfather had a baton, a conductor's baton, and he would conduct Sharkey, much like an orchestra conductor. And Sharkey would navigate and play the song. And it's, like I said, he played the song quite convincingly and at quite a brisk tempo.
Now, radio morphs into television. A lot of radio stars, from Bob Hope to Jack Benny, Abbott and Costello, became great 50s TV stars. The, I guess, iconic entertainment show of the 50s and early 60s was the Ed Sullivan Show, Sunday nights. And Sharkey made some appearances. What can you tell us about maybe his what he saved for the Ed Sullivan Show?
So yeah, the Ed Sullivan Show that premiered in 1948, and as you say, it was iconic. And Sharkey had actually worked with Ed Sullivan several times before Sullivan's TV show premiered. Sullivan was he was the impresario at a big theater in New York City, Lowe State Theater, which was a huge movie palace. And movie palaces were a big deal back in the 40s. So there would be a showing of a feature film, but before that, there'd be A-list entertainers and bands. And so Sullivan would conduct the stage show. And he hired Sharkey several times. So by the time Sullivan's TV show hit in 1948, he was quite familiar with Sharkey and had him on the show several times.
It's a great story, and it's also some interesting Kingston history from a bygone era. And considering that Kingston now, according to the New York Times, one of the hippest real estate markets in the country, it's interesting to catch some of its entertainment history. The book is called Sharkey, When Sea Lions Were Stars of Show Business, 1907 and 1958. And the story really about a seal and his trainer, which was Gary's great-grandfather, and a very entertaining read. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you, Doug.
By the way, I open up to a photo of Sharkey with Mo, Larry, and Curly. It doesn't get much better than that.
He did work with the Three Stooges, yes.
Anyway, congratulations on the book. We appreciate you spending time with us here at the Woodstock Roundtable.
Okay, thank you again.
Thanks, Gary.